Snow White, one of the most famous stories of the Grimm brothers, and full with symbols and hidden signs. So, welcome to my fairy tale channel. My name is Jadwiga, and I'm gonna talk about, or tell you the story of Snow White first, and then talk about the symbols in that story. Once upon a time, there was a queen. It was winter, snow was laying outside, and this queen was sitting by the open window, sewing. And while she was sewing and thinking, she picked into her finger, and three drops of blood fell into the snow. And looking at these red dots in the white snow, she said to herself, "Oh, I wish that I will have a daughter as white as snow, as red as blood, and as black as this ebony frame around that window." And shortly after that, she gave birth to a little girl that was as white as snow, as red as blood, and as black as ebony. Unfortunately, shortly after, the queen died, and the king, after he had waited for a couple of months, married another woman. And this woman was the most beautiful woman the world had ever seen. And it was very, very important to her that she was the most beautiful woman in the world. And to make sure she was, she had a mirror hanging on the wall, and that mirror always told the truth. So whenever she said, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" the mirror would say, "Your Majesty is the fairest here." And then the queen was happy and content, and had nothing more to wish than to keep herself beautiful. But as her little stepdaughter, Snow White, she was called Snow White, grew, she became more and more beautiful. And not only that, everyone loved her and liked her and loved to talk to her and to listen to her. And she was just so beautiful. And one day, it happened what had to happen. When the queen asked her, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" the mirror would say, "Your Majesty is the fairest here. But Snow White's beauty shines 1,000 times more clear." Now she was no longer the most beautiful woman in the world. There was a little girl growing up and becoming more beautiful every day. So she was so angry, her heart was so poisoned with envy, that she told a hunter to take that little girl into the woods and shoot her to death. And to prove that he had killed her, she wanted the liver and the lungs, because she said, "I can no longer stand looking at that girl. Take her out and kill her." So the hunter, of course, had to do what he was told. But when they were in the forest, Snow White kneeled down and said, "Oh, please, please, dear hunter, let me live. I promise I will run deep into the woods and never, ever return back home. But please, leave me my life." Well, the hunter did not like to kill Snow White. But on the other hand, he thought, when she's running into the forest, the wild animals will do that, and at least I don't have to kill her myself. And so he let her go, and instead killed a young deer, took the liver and the lungs, and brought that to the queen. The queen boiled that liver and lung and ate it, and thought now she had eaten Snow White's beauty as well, since Snow White was dead. And she would shine brightly with Snow White's beauty too. Meanwhile, Snow White was running deep, deep, deep into the forest, and of course the wild animals saw her, but they wouldn't do her any harm. So at the end of the day, Snow White reached a little cabin. And when she went in there, nobody was there but a table set with 7 plates and 7 spoons and 7 forks and 7 knives and 7 little glasses. And on each table was a little bit to eat, and in each glass was a little bit to drink. So Snow White was very hungry, and she couldn't see anybody, but she thought, I won't eat all of one plate. So she took a little bit of each of the plates and a little sip of one glass, and then she was tired. And well, there were 7 beds along the walls, and she tried them all, but they were too narrow or too short or too whatever, until she found the 7th one that was long enough for her, and she lay down and fell sound asleep. After a while, the owners of that little cabin came home. That were 7 dwarfs. And they were working during daytime, they were working to dig for gold, but at night they would return home and have their dinner. Now, the first dwarf coming in said, who has eaten from my plate? And the next one said, who has taken from my bread? And the next one said, who has eaten from my fork? And who has drunk from my glass? And so it went on, and eventually one said, who has laid in my bed? And in mine, and in mine, and in mine. So until the 7th dwarf saw Snow White in his bed. And they all gathered around that beautiful girl and did not dare to wake her up. They let her sleep. And the 7th dwarf, whose bed was now occupied by Snow White, he spent 1 hour in each of his companions' beds that night, so that he could sleep as well in a bed, but not disturb one of the dwarfs for all the time. And next morning, Snow White woke up. And the dwarfs looked at her and asked her, where do you come from? How did you get here? Who are you? And Snow White told them her story. And the dwarf said, well, if you want to keep our house clean, if you want to do the cooking and the laundry, then you can stay here and we will be happy to have you here. And Snow White, of course, agreed. But the dwarfs also said, be careful. Be careful, because your stepmother soon will find out that you are still alive and she will try to kill you. So be careful. And Snow White promised, and the 7 dwarfs went out for work. So that happened a couple of days, and everyone was happy until the old queen stood at her wall talking to her mirror. Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all? And the mirror said, your majesty is the fairest here, but Snow White, who lives with the 7 dwarfs, her beauty shines 1,000 times more clear. Now the queen knew that the hunter had betrayed her, and she became so angry. She tried to find a solution how to kill that girl. And so she dressed up as an old woman, and nobody would have recognized the queen, took a basket full of nice little stuff, and walked to Snow White's home. And there she called out, fine goods for sale, fine goods for sale. And Snow White, opening the door, saw all these beautiful things in the basket of that woman and asked her to come in. Now the queen had a belt, a beautiful belt, and Snow White liked it very much. And the queen said, the old woman said, "Oh, I put it around your waist because it had to be bent on the back." And as she did so, she pulled it so tight that Snow White wasn't able to breathe anymore, and she fell down like dead. The old woman, the queen, left for home, and when the dwarfs came home at night and saw Snow White lying dead on the ground, they were mourning and upset and didn't know what to do, until one of them turned her around and saw that tight bent belt and cut it. So with this moment, Snow White could breathe again, and she recovered, and told the dwarfs what had happened. And they again said, "Be careful, this must have been your stepmother. Don't let anyone into the house, this is dangerous." And Snow White promised. Now the following day, the queen, she was sure she had succeeded now. She asked the mirror, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" And the mirror said, "Your Majesty is the fairest here, but Snow White's beauty shines 1,000 times more clear." So she knew she had not succeeded, and she thought for another solution. And again, she dressed like an old woman, but this time she looked completely different than the first time, and walked to the cabin where Snow White lived. And again, she shouted out, "Fine goods for sale, fine goods for sale." And Snow White opened the door a tiny little bit and said, "I'm sorry, I'm not allowed to let anyone in." "Oh, you don't have to let me in," said the queen. "Just open the window." And so she did. Snow White opened the window, and the old woman, she stood there and showed her a beautiful comb and said, "This would be so nice for your hair. It would shine like the sun. So just let me show you." And she took that comb, and when it touched Snow White's hair, the poison in that comb made her fall down like dead. The queen hasted home, and when the dwarfs came, again they saw Snow White lying there like dead. And this time it was not a belt, but after looking everywhere, one of them found that comb, pulled it out of her hair, and Snow White came back to life. Well, again, the dwarf said, "You may not let anyone in nor let anyone touch you, because you see, that was your stepmother. And again, she almost had succeeded to kill you. Be careful, please, please, please." And Snow White promised. So meanwhile, the queen had asked her mirror again, and asked, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" And again the mirror said, "Your Majesty is the fairest here, but Snow White's beauty shines 1,000 times more clear." The second try had not worked either. So now she needed a solution, a really safe solution, and she thought forth and back and eventually found it. So again, in another costume with another masquerade, she went to Snow White's house. And again she called, "Good, fine goods for sale, fine goods for sale, come and look." And Snow White opened the window and said, "No, I'm sorry. I'm not allowed to let you in. I'm not allowed to let you touch me. Please stay away." And the old woman said, "Well, but look, I have a beautiful apple here. It's allowed to taste an apple, isn't it?" And she reached it over to Snow White, but Snow White, "No, no, no, thank you. I don't do that. I don't eat that apple." "Oh, you're afraid it might be poisoned," said the old woman. "Look, I break it in two, and I take the pale side, and you get the red side. Now, and you see, as I eat and I'm fine, you can do that as well." And Snow White, not knowing that her stepmother had just prepared one half of the apple, and of course she herself had eaten the unpoisoned, the healthy part of the apple, Snow White took that apple, and eating it, she fell down like dead. That night when the dwarfs came home, they couldn't find anything, not a belt, not a comb, nothing that showed them that how Snow White had been poisoned. And they sat around her mourning for many days without that Snow White had changed her shape or had changed in any way. She was still as beautiful, as white as snow, as red as blood, and as black as ebony. And then the dwarfs decided to put her into a coffin from glass so that she could be seen even though she was lying in a coffin. And they carried that coffin up on one of their 7 mountains. And still, Snow White remained the way she was, so beautiful. Shortly after, a prince came along, stayed overnight with the dwarfs, and next morning he found the coffin with Snow White. And he was so overwhelmed by her beauty that he fell in love with her, of course. And he went to the dwarfs and said, "Well, tell me your price. Cost it whatever it may. I pay any price, anything you want. I give you everything, but I need Snow White. I need to be able to look at her because I cannot live without her. I just have to see her." And the dwarfs shook their heads and said, "Not for all the money in the world we would sell Snow White." The prince was upset, and he said, "Well, if you don't sell her, just make her as a present. Give her to me because my heart beats for her, and I can only live longer when I'm able to see her. Otherwise, I have to die." Well, the dwarfs were touched by these words and agreed that the prince could take Snow White with him home. And he sent some servants up on the mountain and told them to carry that coffin very carefully down the hill. But on that way it happened that one of the servants stumbled over a root, and this vibration made the poisoned piece of apple that still was in Snow White's throat, flew out, and she opened the lid of the coffin, sat up, and said, "What's going on here? Where am I? And who are you?" And the prince knelt down and told her everything that had happened and asked her to become his wife and live with her on his castle. And of course, she agreed. So now the wedding was planned and many people were invited. And the stepmother was invited too. And when she asked the mirror on the wall, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" The mirror said, "Your Majesty is the fairest here, but the new queen, her beauty shines 1,000 times more clear." Now she was curious to see this new queen, who was even more beautiful than herself, and she dressed up very, very well and put all her jewelry on, and what was the most beautiful appearance, and like that went to that wedding. But when she saw the new queen, she of course recognized Snow White, and she stood there stumbling, staring at her, not being able to move. But iron shoes had been made for her, and they were just now taken out of the fire, put on her feet, and she had to dance with these hot iron shoes until she fell down dead. That was her penalty. Yeah, what a story, and full of symbols. The 3 colors, they appear a couple of times. White is the innocence, and red is the color of love, but also the color of anger and rage and upsetness. And the black combines all the shadows, and it's the color of maybe enlightenment, but maybe awakening. Yeah, I think awakening is the better word. So these 3 things are combined within Snow White. And now we have the 7 dwarfs and the 7 mountains. And when we look at tarot, we see that the number 7 is the chariot. And that means getting started, begin something new, victory over one's own fears or concerns or sorrows. So it's a great start. And this is, oh yes, and the 7 dwarfs, they could also represent the 7 human characters. I just have to read that because I might forget one. So this is smart, this is grumpy, that is happy, that is sleepy, shy, sick, and clown. But it may also represent the 7 sins or the 7 chakras, or wherever the 7 appears in our daily lives. The 7 days has a week, and maybe we find even more 7 related things. So what does it mean that Snow White runs away and at the end falls asleep? The one explanation is that she runs away from her own development. So she comes into puberty, and puberty, I don't know, but you know what I mean. And this is a time of great change in a young girl or a young boy as well. And she's afraid of what happens within her body. Maybe the red is also the sign for her beginning menstruation. And she runs away, she's hiding and at least falling asleep. And during that sleep, she can recover and make all these developmental steps to become a grown-up woman. Because when she stays with the dwarfs, she's still a stupid little girl. She knew the danger. She has been warned so many times, but she's naive. She just opened the door and she said, "No, I don't let you in, but I can talk to you through the window." she hasn't learned much in this phase of the story. So there is a lack of knowledge, a lack of wisdom, a lack of experience, because she's just a little girl. She has not experienced much. But without sleep, she gathers all her powers, her strength, and then she's able to, for real pure love. Because the prince is already a really adult man. He does not approach her by his ego. Oh, this is a beautiful woman, I want to have her. Or this possession. Yes, he wants to possess her, but just to look at her. He thinks she's dead, so he cannot believe that he could marry her. But he simply wants to look at her. This is a state of adulthood that is far beyond this puberty or young men's efforts to possess a woman, to show everyone, hey, look what a beautiful woman I have by my side. This is not the intention of that prince. Yes, I hope you liked that. You could follow my explanations, and if you did so, give me a thumb and subscribe to my channel. Bye.